I don't know how many of you remember Johnny Carson, the Johnny Carson show. He used to have a character, a Swami or something. What was his name? What was his name? Yeah, and he would put and then he would give the answer, and then he'd look at what the question was. So I'm going to try that with one that I just pulled out of there. The answer being, all you need is love. And the question is, how to help people open their minds. All right. All right. So I grabbed a whole bunch of cards and some fantastic questions, and there were really 4 that I want to try to spin into a message for you this morning. In this first part, we've got 3 sections where we'll give 3 different homilies. Randy's going to give the next one, and then the 2 of us together are going to give the final message of the morning. So they'll be short. The questions that I'm choosing to talk about out of about the 10 that I grabbed are the Unitarian viewpoint on the afterlife, and it said all dressed up and nowhere to go. Followed nicely by find your place in this life, finding your place in this life, and then the concept of God in human creation, God as the highest human ideal, and if I still have time, why do people attribute things to evil? So, start with the afterlife. I remember a story that Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, talked about how back in the days when they first started having circuses, and they realized that they could make extra money because people would come early, and they figured, how can we get people to pay a little bit extra? This is W.C. Fields, who was also, was it W.C. Fields? Was he the great circus? Who am I thinking of? P.T. Barnum. I knew it was a couple of initials, followed by a short last name. P.T. Barnum, who was a Unitarian, as it turns out, and a good capitalist, and he knew that how can we get an extra dollar out of these folks? And so he created the sideshow in the circus, and that was so people would come early, and they could go into this tent, and they could see the bearded woman and the snake-skinned man and all those kinds of folks that they used to call it a freak show and all that kind of thing. Well, he had one problem. And the problem was that they had one problem. And the problem was that once people got in, they didn't want to leave until it was showtime for the circus. So the tent would get filled and nobody would leave. And so finally, P.T. Barnum had a great idea. So right above the exit door, he put a sign that said, "The Great Egress." People thought, wow, I want to go see the Great Egress. And they walked out and then they found themselves out the door, and that was okay, and they moved on. But if nobody died, this earth would be overpopulated, and if everybody was afraid to die, what would we do? So religions of the world, Joseph Campbell said, have all come up with ways to help us to understand the afterlife being something that is usually good, or at least an opportunity to get into some good, better life in the next life. It's the great egress, the story that tricks us into feeling okay about the fact that we have to leave this world. Now, of course, there's also stories about hell in the afterworld, and that you see that even in Buddhism. They have the stories of the different bardos and the different ways in which if you've lived a bad life in the afterlife, you will have to suffer different kinds of hells and different kinds of pain. In their story, it's never eternal, because there's nothing in Buddhism, because there's nothing that a human being can do that is eternally bad, so the punishment has to meet the crime, and so in Buddhism there's a cause and effect understanding, and so whatever kinds of crimes or sins you've created in this life, you have to suffer for a while, but eventually you can work your way back through the cycle into a positive place. That's an important idea in Buddhism, as I understand it, in the afterlife. Now, in Christianity, of course, there's the idea of hell, and a lot of that, it seems to me, is based on the idea that we need, in order to help people to behave better. The thinking is, at least for children and more simple ways of looking at the world, you're punished if you're bad, and that's how we keep people in line. It's like the idea of, I think it's similar to capital punishment, right? The idea that, well, if we tell people that they're going to die if they kill somebody, that will stop murder. Well, that doesn't seem to work, right? Most murders happen because people are enraged or greedy and trying to make money if they're going to get paid to kill somebody or need to kill somebody in order to make money. So these human instincts get people to do that, and the fact that there might be punishment on the other side doesn't really help, just like ideas of hell don't really keep people from doing bad acts. So in my mind, when we talk about the afterlife, I really don't know. I'm agnostic about the afterlife. I'm not sure what happens after we die. So my focus is on this life. Henry David Thoreau said, he goes, I just want to take it one life at a time. There may be something, but I'm just focusing on doing the best I can in this life right now. And I truly believe that if we do the best we can and we act in ways that are loving and we help to bring justice into our world, and justice being love with legs, then we will indeed. If there is an afterlife, if there is a judgment, if there is anything like that in the next life, that any kind of idea of a loving God, any kind of a God that would be worth worshiping, would be a God that would not punish people for living in the best way they knew how to be loving and just and kind. And so I think that we're on a good path if we're trying to live in such a way in this life. So that's getting to the second question about how do we live in this life. And that really is the focus of this church. It's not about the afterlife. If you've ever been to a memorial service in this church, you know that in that memorial service, we talk about the life of that person and the gifts that life has brought into our lives, the gifts that we've all received because this person lived, all the people who've gathered. And so we focus on their life. We don't focus on, it's not a funeral, it's a memorial. We memorialize someone. We celebrate their life instead of talking about a lot of theology about Jesus and metaphysical things and afterlife that really nobody knows for sure about. And so instead of talking about what we don't know, we talk about what we do know, which was that person's life. And everybody's life, I've found, as someone who's done over 100 memorial services in this church, everybody's life has a sermon to preach to the people who've gathered at the time of their death. There's a message inside their life and their life story that is something that everybody can take away. And so as I put together a memorial, or any of our ministers do in this church, we're always looking for what is the message, what is the sermon that this life has preached for us. And that's the text of the celebration of their life in a memorial service. Because even as we talk at Easter time about Jesus, and we talk about the story of Easter, for us, it's not that he died for us, it's that he lived, and because he lived, he showed us certain ways of being in the world. And we're trying to follow his life. So we often say that this is a religion. This is not a religion about Jesus. We try to follow a religion of Jesus, trying to walk in the way of loving our neighbor as ourselves, in a way of loving our neighbors, and also, as best we can, even loving our enemies. It's a powerful message, and we try to live by that as best we can. And it's more his life than his death, and it's the same with us. Now, God in human creation, I think, is a similar way. When we talk about this story of, go to Christmas, if we're talking about the Christian scriptures, and the idea of God being born in the flesh, incarnated in the flesh. Well, the idea is that God, whatever that God represents, love for you, kindness, compassion, all that is good, all that is hopeful, for all of those things, justice, for all of those things to come into the world, it requires people, right? God doesn't have hands to hold, or arms to hug, or words to be able to speak to somebody who's low. And so it requires it being, we could use the word God, but you could also use the word love or kindness or compassion. We need human beings to bring those into the world. So it's up to us. We make in flesh, incarnate, carne meaning flesh, in the flesh, incarnation. We incarnate love through our lives. We incarnate justice through our lives. Otherwise, they're just ideas. If they're just things we think about or read about, they're just ideas. But then they become real in the flesh when we live them and embody them in our lives. And so, yes, in a sense, we are all the incarnation of God. If God is love, and God is kindness, and God is compassion, and God is forgiveness, and those kinds of things. And we can all do that with our lives. And when we do that with our lives, then when we do come to die, and then our friends and family and ministers get up to memorialize our lives, there's something to memorialize. There's a message there. There's a way in which we've lived that have made other people's lives better. And we've given something back. So regardless of whether there's an afterlife or not, we've made... There is an afterlife in the sense that we live on through the things that we've given away, the things that we've created with our lives. When we give our children love or our neighbor love or forgive others, that lives on long after we're gone. And so in that sense, there is an afterlife, and people live on and on and on, and we're surrounded by a mighty cloud of witnesses, people who continue, who even though they're not here, alive among us, they still surround us with their love and the peace and the joy that they've brought into our lives. And so nobody is gone forever, and everybody lives on eternally through those who they've touched. And lastly, just a simple question of evil. So there's a question. The question actually was a little more specific, talking about why do we still talk about evil when really what we're talking about is mental illness. And I don't know if this is spurred on by the killing of our politicians in Arizona, but that seems to be an act of mental illness. But I would just say this about evil, because some people want to deny that there's anything such as evil in the world, and I would like to always distinguish between evil and tragedy, because an earthquake, that's tragedy. A heart attack, that's a tragedy, but it's not evil in the sense of something that we can somehow stop or somehow change. But evil, in my definition of evil, is something that is created by human beings when we use our lives in ways that are hurtful. Instead of using our enfleshed bodies and minds to spread love and kindness and goodness into the world, we use them to create destruction and divisiveness through prejudice and discrimination, through violence and those kinds of things. We are creating evil in the world. So evil, in my definition, would be a human creation, a misuse of our lives. And in that sense, I'll close with one that's not on here, which is redemption. How do we redeem our lives? Redemption, in my mind, would be that every one of us was born with certain skills, certain abilities, certain possibilities. And when we use our lives for the things that we are able to do and give back to the common good, we redeem them for their full value. Like a coupon is redeemed, right? When you bring a coupon into the store, you redeem it for its full value, right? But if you don't bring it into the store, it doesn't get redeemed. It's only redeemed if it's used for the purpose in which it was given. And so, in the same way, when we use our lives in the ways in which we are able to and give back our lives and use them for the purpose in which we've been created, we redeem our lives for their full value. And then we've lived a great life. And then, indeed, there's an afterlife, because we live on and on and on and on forever. Amen.